Hey, I thought I would start reading you a story. So, I'm going to read Peter Pan, Chapter 1. Oh, we won't finish it tonight, but we're going to start it. Peter Pan, Chapter 1. Peter Breaks Through. The Darling family lived in London. Wendy was the oldest of the Darling children. John followed her, while Michael was the youngest. When she was younger, Wendy would often think that her parents would give her away, as there were too many mouths to feed. Her father was extremely proud of her, but he never showed it. The family had a dog, a Newfoundland, called Nana. They trusted her with their lives. Nana was their appointed nurse for the kids. All in all, the Darlings were the simplest, happiest family in London, until Peter Pan came. The Darling children often thought of Neverland, which was more or less an island with vibrant colors and clear water surrounding the island with coral reefs. Peter Pan lived there with Tinker Bell, a tiny fairy. Here's a picture of the Darling's house. For each child, Neverland had something different. John, for instance, had flamingos in his Neverland, which would fly over a lagoon while he shot at them. Michael, who was small, had a flamingo with lagoons flying over it in his mind. John lived in a boat turned upside down on the sands, Michael in a wigwam, Wendy in a house of leaves deftly sewn together. Occasionally, Mrs. Darling would question them about Peter Pan. She knew nothing of him, yet he was always there in the minds of her children. When Wendy was questioned about him, she sadly admitted he was strange. Here's a picture of Peter Pan. "But my pet, who is he?" asked Mrs. Darling. "Peter Pan, Mother," replied Wendy. "He hasn't grown up at all. He's just my size." Wendy said this with a lot of confidence, like she knew it as a fact. When Mrs. Darling told her husband about this, he just laughed it off and told her to leave the children to their imagination. "It will all go away," he assured her. But it didn't, and soon Peter Pan gave Mrs. Darling quite a shock. Quite often she would find dry leaves in the nursery that weren't there when she put the children to sleep. There were also muddy footprints on the floor. Wendy just shook her head and smiled at this. "It's Peter again." "What do you mean, Wendy?" "He never wipes his feet," Wendy sighed. She explained frankly to her mother that she thought Peter sometimes came into the nursery, sat at the foot of her bed, and played his pipes for her. Somehow she was always asleep, and even though she didn't see him while awake, she knew it was him. "What nonsense! No one can get into the house without knocking," argued Mrs. Darling. "Mother, he uses the window." "The nursery window is 3 floors up, Wendy." Later, she found dry leaves near the window. Wendy found this natural, and Mrs. Darling found it hard to dismiss. The very next night, the lives of Wendy and her brothers were going to change forever. End of Chapter 1.